I'm a cameraman, and I was working on a job just off of East Houston Street in a deconsecrated synagogue. It was a job for ABC News. And we were shooting musical segments for a show called Life 360. And we'd been shooting for a couple of days. And during our camera meeting, someone stuck their head in and say, "Hey, a plane hit the World Trade Center." And we thought, okay, it's some poor soul in a helicopter or a small plane got blown in. It was upsetting to hear. We kept working. And then when someone ran in and said, "Hey, another plane hit," we all stopped. And the artist we were shooting that day was Mary Chapin Carpenter, and we had a television set up in her green room for her and her band and her folks. So we all ran in there and stood in a semicircle and watched. And we were just 20 seconds after the live event of the second plane striking, so we watched it replayed over and over. So we stopped what we were doing and had a meeting with everybody, pulled everybody out of the truck and into the main room. And the director said, "Look," he was the director of World News Tonight, a guy named Eric Siegel. And he said, "Look, we're done. All of the gear is being returned to use of ABC News. Those of you who are on this show, we don't know what we need from you. If you want to stay and work for us, that's great. If you need to leave, it's okay. But between the time we sort of stopped and the time he gathered everybody, I ran to my car because at the time I was also a New York State EMT. And so you carry things in the car, an emergency bag and oxygen and some other stuff. And I always had one of those like helicopter flight suit zip up things, because if you come upon an accident on the side of the road, you really want to have something over your clothes. So I ran to the car and got the flight suit and ran back in. And when he shut everything down, he sort of gestured to me and he said, "You go and do whatever you need to do." So I took about 10 minutes and secured my equipment and climbed into the flight suit and walked to my car and got my jump bag, as it's called, and my oxygen, and just started walking. Now, when I was heading to my car, I was on Houston Street for a few minutes, and there was this tightly packed crowd of people all together standing on the sidewalk, not moving. So I sort of walked over and looked, and between other buildings, they could see the towers. And I saw tiny dark specks dropping here and there. I understood what that was. That was people who were jumping. And I got my gear from my car and started walking west on Houston Street. And I got to Broadway. And it's weird. I volunteered for an ambulance corps up in Orange County, New York, Monroe, New York. And so I didn't work for the fire department. That wasn't my job. But an ambulance was coming down Broadway, strange times. And I held out my hand and they stopped. And the guy rolled down his window and he said, literally said, "You want to work?" And I said, "Yeah." So I got in and we made it down just near City Hall when the first tower had come down. And so whatever that timeline is, and I don't have it memorized, between the hit of the second plane and the first tower collapsing, that's all it took for me to get out of the job and gather my gear and flag down the ambulance. There were people running from that side of Broadway, from the side streets, and they were all covered with this thick grayish material we've all seen in photographs and videos. And we stopped right in the middle of Broadway, because sitting in the middle of Broadway was a New York police officer. She's sitting on the ground, leaning back on her hands, gasping, covered in this stuff. She couldn't breathe. So I jumped out and got some oxygen on her, and we got her into the ambulance. And then we picked up other people, whoever we came upon. Didn't get to the World Trade Center site. Turned around with an ambulance full of people, something you just can't. Maybe you have two people in an ambulance if there's a bad car accident. You just have to get two people in. Otherwise, we had something crazy like 5 or 6 people and 2 or 3 EMTs crammed in the back. Went to St. Vincent's on 7th Avenue, dropped them off, drove down towards the World Trade Center again and found other people who were injured or having trouble breathing or seeing because of the material, and transported them back. Um, and then I was out of oxygen. So I sort of hopped off that bus and thanked them for letting me be with them, and went to find a fire station so I could refill my oxygen tank. And that's when I learned that the fire department doesn't do that. They have them delivered and that's it. So somebody was good enough to break the rules and give me another oxygen tank. He said, just leave your empty. It's fine. So I had the right tools to help out and got picked up by a fire department ambulance. And we picked up some people and dropped them off. And then they were directed to go over and line up outside the Chelsea Piers. And we hopped out. And politically, it was strange. I'm not a member of the fire department of New York Ambulance, right? Um, Years before, they had been absorbed by the fire department, so it was no longer a separate EMS service. But it was extraordinary times, and they pulled me in, and I did a run, I think just one run with them. Then we got to the piers, and I thought, I need to step away from this before someone sort of looks at me sideways and says, you're not with the city, are you? So I went inside the piers, and at the time, there were two huge empty sound stages. Law and Order used to shoot on those stages. And they had struck like 2 weeks before for the season. So one was empty, the other was empty. And one of the rooms was being set up as sort of a quick triage. Let's get everybody in here first and then set up treatment in the other stage. And somebody came in with hand trucks full of oxygen equipment, what's called a tree, where you have one big tank and 20 lines. And I said, well, I kind of get that. Tell me what to do. And so I went to work and spent a lot of the day helping set that stuff up. It was chaotic enough, and there were enough people coming in who had fled the buildings, who were injured slightly, or who couldn't breathe, who had terrible eye problems because of all the stuff in their eyes. And no one I was near was really saying, so where are the people from inside? Where are the catastrophically badly injured people that we should be seeing? No one was, those conversations weren't being had. So I worked on that for a few hours and sort of caught wind of the fact that they were setting up essentially like a mobile surgical area in the other sound stage. So I thought, well, this could be a good thing to do. And I asked if I could step away from what I was helping with. And one of the lady who was supervising it said, yeah. So I walked down the hall and found 50 cots and light and stuff being brought in on pallets from hospitals. All the hospitals were sending in all the gear they could by way of emergency surgery and emergency treatment material. The assumption was that there'd be thousands of people who'd been badly injured in the buildings that needed to be brought here because the hospitals like St. Vincent's would be overwhelmed. And I met up with a surgeon named Alan, a cardiac surgeon who was in town for a conference. And when this happened, he just started walking, like his conference was in Chelsea or something. He just started walking. Asked some cops, where should I go? And they said, go to the piers, you know. And I met another surgeon, and he wound up making a career out of this event. He stopped being a surgeon. He joined the Army. He became a trauma surgeon. He's been to the Middle East multiple times. Now he teaches other trauma surgeons how to do their work in the field. Remarkable. But I met these two guys who were sort of standing near one of the tables, and they said, look, I'm just an EMT. You want me to for stuff? So the three of us set about setting up a table and trying to get all the materials, assuming there'd be badly injured people. Nobody came in. A few firefighters and police officers who were down there who were trying to start digging right away. And of course, the site was still on fire, but they were digging and trying to get in. So there was some bad finger injuries and amputations and other stuff, but no huge influx of patients, of civilians, nothing. And so as the hours wore on, we realized what this meant. You know, it was pretty grim all afternoon. We realized no one was going to come in because they were all lost. And we set up and worked and did our stuff and took care of a few people with some minor injuries. And then someone from the city, let me stop. It went from a somewhat chaotic scene. And by that, I don't mean no one was in control. The fire department and the EMS were in control. By the time I left around 7 o'clock, the Army was in control. They were controlling who came in and out of the Chelsea Piers. They weren't directing fire department or medical people, but they had the area locked up. So the cardiac surgeon said, are you going to go home? And I said, well, I need to get to my car, and I really don't want to. Maybe I should come back tomorrow. And he said, look, I live on West 60th. Just come and stay with my family. A total stranger. There was another guy, an anesthesiologist, who had come in to help, and he was at some hotel on 6th Avenue. So we flagged down a cab, amazingly, and dropped the guy off. And then this doctor, Alan, took me to his home. There's his wife, bereft and overwhelmed, and his little 8-year-old daughter, scared because mommy and daddy are both crying, and who was the stranger? I mean, it was, but they were great. They were sweet, and they were welcoming. And he put me in his daughter's room, and they put their daughter in their bed, and I slept for just a couple hours. Very hard to sleep after all of that stress, and there was nothing but wall-to-wall sirens anyway, as anybody in Manhattan can attest. For days there were sirens, but especially that first day and night. So we got up, and his wife made us some breakfast, which was really great. And we went downstairs and flagged a cab. And because of the outfit I was wearing and this little badge I had on, we were let through, because below, I think 14th Street, things were really locked up, especially on the west side. But we were let through, and we got back to the piers, and clearly, like, no one had come in overnight. Like, all of that massive influx of material and personnel trying to set up a trauma hospital was almost for naught, aside from a few injuries that needed to be treated there. But because their hospitals were not overwhelmed, if you were a firefighter or a police officer, or someone at the Pile, before it was called Ground Zero, you went to St. Vincent's, you went to a real hospital. Their emergency departments weren't slammed. So we got there and found out that it had been sadly quiet. And so we found somebody coordinating personnel to go down into the hot zone and help out and do a little medical work right there as people were being hurt, sort of get them set until an ambulance could be sent for them. So I looked at these two guys and I said, well, let's go for a walk. We should go down there, So we asked if it's okay, should we walk or wait for a group? And there were like 8 or 10 other people going. So we all walked down the West Side Highway and got, I don't remember the street names, maybe 2 blocks north of the World Trade Center site, and coordinated with some other people. So the other surgeon and I walked, we were assigned to go to South Ferry. South Ferry was the place to get to if you were injured on the south side of the site. Because the overpass walkway had collapsed, you couldn't drive down the West Side Highway, right? There's this thing in the way, this is debris. And so we walked through the Winter Garden, I think, what is that, World Trade Center 7, maybe, on the West Side Highway with a beautiful domed ceiling and everything. We cut through there and walked down to South Ferry. And one of the most compelling and difficult memories was that walk, because we're walking through thick snowdrifts of this gray stuff, and thousands and thousands of personal photographs charred on the edges are all burned up, but they were photos, but tons of photos just burned on the edges by the fuel, by the Jet A fuel. People's photos, little snaps of people's lives. And here I am, a cameraman and the photographer my whole life. And I bent over and picked up a picture. And I thought, gosh, somebody should try to gather, somebody should do something to get these to family members. And then I dropped it. It's like, that's not why I was there. That's going to be someone else's passion, hopefully. But if I went down that path, I was going to stop doing what I was doing and, do this other thing. So I just dropped it. And I it's a family photo. And I remember, it's like, I can't do this. So we walked down, and it's really like a bad blizzard. And we just had a bad blizzard in the city a few weeks ago, right? It's mid-February 21 as I'm saying this. It was like a bad blizzard, but it was all of this particulate And the hardest thing to do, I think, of all of this was watch my feet and realize I'm walking through people. I'm, it's not just the sheetrock in the middle and the broken glass. And the reason it was so thick like snow is, of course, you can't compress water. So when the buildings fall, the water explodes into the walls, all the piping in the building, and made this thick snow. But it's the people. It's all of the people who died. And I just kept thinking, this is all hallowed ground. I'm walking through a battleground, whatever word you want to use. It wasn't just sheetrock and water, and it was hard to do. So we walked down to South Ferry, met the person who was coordinating medical treatment. And a lot of what was happening is that the first responders of all stripe, construction workers and fire department and sanitation workers, there were tons of people there with heavy equipment. I don't mean to mention just the firefighters of the EMS. A lot of people showed up by the next day. It was great. Anybody who had a dump truck or understood how to use heavy equipment was heading down there. They were getting a lot of amputated fingers as huge things would shift. They were losing a fingertip or breaking an arm, and a ton of eye injuries because of the burning and the particulate. So I spent most of the day, I guess, helping treat those folks, and I made use of a trick I learned in my EMS class from a guy who was a brilliant instructor up at Mobile Life Support in Newburgh, who taught me, a guy named Dave Grass, how to irrigate someone's eyes and not waste the water. So just a great little MacGyver trick. And we were clearing out people's eyes because the stuff was a terrible irritant. They were having trouble seeing and scratching their corneas. So it was a lot of that and minor injury treatment. And towards the afternoon, I walked back up with Omar, the other surgeon, and got to the Chelsea Piers, and I was allowed in, and there was a sign-in sheet, and you put your New York State Department of Health number, my ENT number, and your name and cell phone number. If you put on a schedule, they'll put you on a schedule to come back in and work. And I decided not to. By that time, it was very much an organized response. All of the volunteer, a lot of photographs of all of these different volunteer ambulance corps, their names are on the side, lined up at the Chelsea Piers on the morning. But by the 12th, they were all gone. And it's not because no one wanted their help. It's because it was the military and it was the city coordinating this. And because there weren't thousands of victims, it became much more structured, as it should, right? Much more of a military operation. And I thought I should go home. I should go find my gear, which was secured, and I should go. So I did. What's weird is it's a big city, and there are people everywhere. I'm a cameraman, and I used to work a lot for Good Morning America, and there is a collection of New York City police officers who are allowed to work on their off days doing security. And there's a woman, a detective, who has been on that show on and off for years. If you're outside with a camera, they'll try to have someone nearby watching. It's a good idea. I walk out to the West Side Highway from the Chelsea Piers, and I start heading down. I'm going to get to Houston Street and walk. I make it to Houston Street, and I see an unmarked car with a bubble light flashing. And I thought, this is the day when I hitchhike off a cop. Like, why not? I'm wearing this flight suit with a big blue star of life. And I held my hand up, and she pulled over, and I said, I'm trying to get all the way to the other end of Houston Street. She said, yeah, get in. And I had a dust mask on, which is weird because we all wear them now. And I pulled it down. She looked at me and she just started laughing. And I looked real carefully and I said, what are the odds, man? This is this lady who I'd seen in my other life as a cameraman on and off for years. Tons of concerts in Bryant Park. She's the one who drove me back to my gear. And went inside, packed up my gear, pulled off the flight suit and turned it inside out. It wasn't caked with the material like you've seen pictures of people just as the buildings had come down and they were covered, but it was everywhere. I took it off, turned it inside out, got a hefty bag, and I got to my car, put my equipment cases in, and I opened the driver's door. and I sort of turned sideways and I kicked my sneakers off and I drove away. I didn't want to take those sneakers with all the stuff I've been walking through back. So I left them there in the parking lot and I drove home. And it was very complicated time. It's very traumatic. Um, but and some of it's very personal trauma. Like, I was, I don't know, in my late 30s or early 40s when this happened. And I couldn't reach my wife and I couldn't reach my parents. No cell service. The towers were damaged. I just kept trying. And somewhere in the afternoon of September 11th, my parents picked up the phone. And it's a hard thing to do, to be on the phone with your parents and hear them both sobbing because they're grateful you didn't die. Because I called them before I headed down house and she was like, hey, you watching the TV? I'm going to go do this. And that was it. Radio silence. And they thought I was dead. And that was, in a very personal way, a tough part of this, to be on the phone and to realize the hours of realizing they thought they lost me. So that was tough. But off I went, drove up the thruway and went back home. And it was very tough for the first few weeks, and that's about that's about all I went through.
Peter, you had a very interesting decision to make, which was, do you cover the catastrophe as a cameraman or do you help as an EMT? Did that weigh at all in your mind, or did you just immediately, I'm an EMT, I'm going?
It didn't take any time, to be honest. A lot of friends who shoot news, I love them dearly. They put themselves in incredibly complicated situations, right? Certainly that week they did. But there was no question when I saw the footage on that TV standing there with Mary Chapin and her people and all my production family. It's like, I'm not gonna stand behind a camera. This is not the time to do that. So, it didn't take any time to make that decision. As I joked with people, not just because of 9/11, but people in the film industry and in the television industry, it's very intensive and people get worked up and they're very passionate and dedicated, as they are in a lot of other industries. And once I got into EMS work, I would sit there thinking, yeah, this isn't real life. It's just the movies. It's just television. I didn't want to be one step removed behind a camera doing that job. I wanted to try to do what I could.
How do you think all this changed your life?
Um, it made me more fearful. It made me more aware of mortality, my mortality, the mortality of everyone. We've all planet-wide read the stories of people who woke up with a sore tooth and called out sick and didn't die because they went to the dentist. Or there's thousands of those stories. The buildings were unusually empty, both of them. Just the luck of the draw. They were a little empty that day. More people should have been at work by 8:15, 8:30. It's made me more aware of anybody could die at any time. It doesn't dominate my life, but I'm totally more afraid of that than I was. It also made me very aware of the level of skill and dedication from the military and firefighters and EMS. The prep and the training that goes into responding quickly on a huge scale, but knowing it's going to be face-to-face and person-to-person at the same time, right? Those are logistical and thoughtful processes. And when I see something on the television or I read an article, I'm very appreciative of what goes into it, because it's called an MCI, mass casualty incident. And having lived through one, aside from the emotional impact and all the upset and the stuff in my head, I can look at that and say, these people are doing a great job. And if there is a problem, if things go sideways in one little area, Katrina, how things were handled at Katrina in some ways by FEMA and other agencies, people only see the negatives, and that's sad. So it's made me respectful of that.
Anyone who was down there, their health was at risk, especially in the hours and the days just after. How is your health, Peter?
My health so far is great, thank you. I I live right here in New York, so I have followed the fund and the fight to keep the fund alive. Bless their hearts, especially the firefighter who's was sort of the face of that. He passed away right around the time the funding was extended. Terrible, ironic timing. My health is fine. I have not registered with the government site that tracks people who were exposed. Um, because I didn't get down there, and maybe this is my own rationalization for not having done it, I wasn't down at the World Trade Center near the fires until the second day. And fortunately, I was handed a 2 charcoal filter respirator. So I was masked when I did that walk I told you about, cut through the winter garden. Um, I was masked and I had asthma. And if I had been breathing bad stuff, I would, I'd remember it. Um, it doesn't mean I wasn't exposed to all the particulate. I think everybody who was in Manhattan, Brooklyn, we've all seen the satellite photos of where the smoke and the stuff was blowing. Everyone should be aware and be tested and register. I haven't, but my health's good.
Anything else you want to add?
Only that when something big happens, and I don't mean to equate this in a lighthearted way, but when something big happens that affects a lot of people and then the people around them, I'll go all the way to Woodstock, the original Woodstock Festival, right? Lots of people really were there, and then their family and then friends who heard this stuff. The important thing moving forward is that you have an accurate mosaic. And I appreciate what you're doing and what other people have done to try to get accurate information, even 20 years out. I mean, the last thing, I will share this before we finish. So I'm the son of a newspaperman and the son of a teacher. And I knew when I was driving home, I was very upset. I knew that whatever else I did, I had to write it all out. I did not want my memories to become blended with stories in the New Yorker or something I hear on NPR or a recollection from you or one of your colleagues on a music station saying, I was down there, my brother worked this, and that becomes part of my memory, lacking any good information. And I couldn't sleep when I got home. I just couldn't sleep. So I sat at the computer and I wrote out bullet points chronologically, everything I could remember, every little bit. I just wrote bullet points and saved the document. And then about a day later, I started filling it out. And I wrote this narrative. It's, I don't know, it's 12, 13 pages long. And it covers basically what we've shared. There's some other stuff in there. I needed to know that what I remembered wasn't dissolved into other people's narratives. Not because what I experienced is any more important or of any greater value, just for me. I wanted to accurately have it. And I put it out there to some friends on the internet. About 2 months later, I get an email out of nowhere from an English teacher in the Houston Public School District. She said, I found this, someone sent it to me, whatever. Is this you? And I said, yeah, this is me. Because I put my name and my email address on this thing when I posted it. And she said, I teach a class in narrative writing. Now, there's a few things in here that are a little hard for middle schoolers to read. Would you be willing to edit just a little? And may I use this? And I said, sure. Now, mind you, this is right after 9/11. So New Yorkers had it hard, New Jersey, the Northeast, people nearby. But everyone in the country, everyone on the planet was freaked out, And here's this teacher in Texas saying, maybe we can use this. And I said, yeah, sure, whatever you want, go ahead. And I sent it back. And a couple of months later, I got a little email. We're using it district-wide. So at that time, kids in middle school in the city of Houston, amongst other honest narratives, were reading some of, or maybe all of what I'd written. Good. If it did some good, it's great.
All right, before we close, I'm going to urge you, even though you are not sick, to register with the World Trade Center Health Program for two reasons. Number one, we need everyone counted. We need everyone counted who could possibly have been affected, because that could affect future health for other people. So I understand where you're coming from. But secondly, the programs are in place for the next 70 years. God forbid you get sick in the future. You need to register now and get two witnesses now to document it in case those witnesses are dead, if and when you get sick,
Okay.
or you can't find them. But I think it's, as a journalist to journalist, it's so important to document this. So I strongly urge you, please, and anyone who's listening, same thing. If you were there, if you were below Canal Street, in the 8 months after you're still healthy, register, get your witnesses, protect yourself and your family, please.
Okay, I will. I will. You made me think hard about this.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you. I know it was very difficult. Thank you. I really
Thank you very much.
appreciate your participation and what you did during those 2 days. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you.